Magnus Carlsen is considered by many chess players in the chess community to be the greatest chess player of all time. And in today's video, we're going to be looking at the entirety of his career and the openings that he relied on the most with the white pieces. Now, I want to make a full disclaimer. Just because Carlsen played these moves, just because we see Magnus Carlsen playing these openings, doesn't mean you need to, doesn't mean you have to, doesn't even necessarily mean that you should. Okay? Chess is a game of comfortability. Chess is a game where we have different levels of play. Something like the Sicilian Najdorf, I would recommend this for intermediate to advanced players. I probably wouldn't recommend the Sicilian Najdorf for beginner players. Okay, what I recommend for beginner players is to play solid principled opening chess, right? And find an opening that you like, find an opening that you enjoy, and really focus in more on the tactics and the end games as opposed to the opening theory. Okay, now openings are fun, and it all depends on what your goals are, right? But if you're really trying to become a good or even great chess player, you got to get those tactics and you got to get those end games down. All that to say, I do think it's very interesting to look into some of the top players of all time and see what they relied on the most. If you do end up playing any of these openings, it's not like anyone's going to look at you telling you that these openings are bad, because they're just not, right? I mean, if these openings can be played at the highest level of chess, they can work against anyone if you know what you're doing. So with the white pieces here, Carlsen did a really good job, I think, over his career of kind of playing a bunch of different openings. And he's actually talked about this, right? I wish I did this growing up a little bit more. I did jump around openings a little bit, but I wish I played different openings more in, blitz and casual games, because the more openings that you play, the better your style, the better your awareness of ideas in the game of chess. And Carlsen has actually mentioned how this helped him. Playing so many different openings helped him kind of reach the universal style that he eventually got to. When he was growing up, Carlsen was a very aggressive chess player, really found some amazing attacks. But as he progressed in the ranks, he kind of found that style of play could only go so far, right? And what we see now is a more universal style of play. Much of the time, as we're about to see, he's not even worried about getting an advantage out of the opening. He just wants to get into a position where he and his opponent can just play some chess, right? But okay, in fifth place here, we have the move of b3. This is the fifth most popular move that we see from Carlsen on the chess.com database with 53. Fourth place, we have c4 with the English opening. And then in third place, we have knight f3, right? I mean, that's just a solid move. There's a lot of different things that you can do with that. d4 could happen. You can go into a Reti Gambit potentially. You can go to a King's Indian attack. A lot of good stuff there. And in second place, we have d4. And then the most common move that we see Carlsen playing over the entirety of his career is pawn to e4. Okay. Let's first go over the move of d4. What did Carlsen kind of rely on most of the time? Again, Carlsen in so many of his games relied on so many different ideas, lines, all that kind of stuff. But overall, he seems to be pretty into the Queen's Gambit. Okay, if you're a Queen's Gambit player, I recommend that you look at his games, memorize them, study them, try to figure out, what his approach was to these kind of things. Look up interviews, look up thoughts on his games when it comes to the Queen's Gambit, and also look at the database, right? Look at the database online. You can go on Chess, you can go on chess.com. Look at his repertoire and copy it if you're a Queen's Gambit player. That's what I would recommend, okay? And really, no matter what opening you're playing, try to find the GOAT, or greatest of all time, of your chess opening. Okay, so I mean, for example, I played the Sicilian Najdorf for a pretty long time before I ended up switching over to the Hippo and tournament chess. I considered Garry Kasparov to be the greatest Sicilian Najdorf player of all time. He used it a ton, got great results with it, helped progress the opening theory, all that kind of stuff. So Garry Kasparov is someone that I studied relentlessly when it came to that opening, right? So I'm not just talking about someone that played some opening once or twice. I'm talking about someone that made a career out of something. Find the best player that you can and that use the opening that you play and really study their games in that line of variation. Okay, this is going to help you guys a ton. Now, we do see Carlsen playing the Queen's Gambit a lot against c6. I mean, in this case, we see the move of knight f3, definitely the most. Going back against the move of knight f6, we still see the move c4. Okay, now, of course, black here could go into a King's Indian, but against e6, we have knight f3. And after d5, we're back into a queen's gambit decline, which is how most of his games went. Okay, knight c3, he would then bring this bishop out to f4, just keep developing the pieces and just get a solid position to work with. Okay, but going back to the move e4, we're going to look a little bit more in depth at this due to the fact that this is the most popular move that we see, the most common move. I mean, Carlsen has played this more than anything else in his career. We're going to be looking at the following 6 moves, right? The French, E5, the Pirc, Scandinavian, Caro-Kann, and Sicilian, and what we see Carlsen playing the most against each of these. Okay, so this is going to give you guys some ideas on what's being played at the highest levels. And for those of you that already play these lines, Carlsen's a great resource to study. First off, let's go over the move of E6 with the French. Okay, most of the time here we see the move of D4. Now again, Carlsen does a great job of trying different things, which he has attested to the fact that this has helped him progress in his chess. Playing different openings has helped him learn new ideas, all that kind of stuff. I mean, we see games here like B3, we see D3 here, we see G3, we see F4. A lot of different moves played here. You could even mention knight F3. The list goes on. But most of the time, we see the move D4. And against D5, we see knight C3 going into the normal variation. Now, against knight F6, this turns into a classical variation. And there's actually a pretty interesting line here that I had never heard of before really prepping this video. But it's E5 playing F4, and then against C5 playing knight F3. And as white, continues to defend this pawn and black continues to pile up the pressure, we now have bishop E3 with the Boleslavsky variation. Okay, now, according to the engine, this is dead even, just about dead even. Okay, so, as I'm looking right now, Stockfish is telling me this is a dead even game. And this is kind of a common theme I've found in Carlsen's openings. He's not necessarily trying to get a winning position or even an edge sometimes. He's just trying to get a position that he likes to work with. And I think that we can learn a lot from that, right? Now, of course, we're not sure. None of you watching this, unless you're Carlsen, which if you're Carlsen, I don't know why you'd be watching this. But if you're not Carlsen, you're not as good as Carlsen, right? And I understand that. I understand that someone like Carlsen can, get a dead even end game and somehow win against grandmaster competition. But all that to say, though, I think we put too much of an emphasis on the engine evaluation. We just do as chess players, okay? And, computers are great, but I also think that we can kind of rely on them too heavily. What you need to be worried about more is not, oh gosh, I'm now down minus 0.2 instead of plus 0.3. What you need to be worried about is, do I like this position? And am I excited about playing these ideas over the board? If you are, you're going to get better results. So bishop e3 is played here. There's actually a pretty interesting game that we see played against Alireza, in which case queen d2 is played. Bishop e2 was played next, but first off, bishop d3, right? So instead of just bringing this bishop here right away, we see this bishop come to a very active spot, right? And then once the pawn pushes, then we drop the bishop back. Now, why would we do this? Why would we want black to push our bishop back? Well, in all honesty, black has a ton of pressure on d4. And the moment that you push, sure, black does get some space, but in return, we can kind of breathe for a second. d4 is all of a sudden only attacked by a knight, right? So when we play bishop d3, we kind of give black, the decision here. Do you want to deal with this bishop, right? Do you want to deal with this bishop for a long time being very active? Or do you want to kick it out, right, with pushing that pawn to c4? Now, if something like knight b4, this is a prime example of playing bishop to e2. Right, it's still better for us that this knight is on b4. Obviously, at this point, I can't draw arrows very well, but the knight on b4 is, it's a lot worse than it was on c6. What's this knight doing? It's putting pressure on pawns that are already very well defended. That's about it. So just keep that in mind, right? Sometimes in chess, at the higher levels, we see a piece move twice. This is usually not a good idea, but it can be if you're misplacing an opponent's piece. The game continues here with Alireza playing the move c4 again, bishop e2. b5, f5 here. Amazing break. Just trying to break this game open. Notice if black takes, we're going to take on d5. Okay, this is not a good idea for black. So knight b6 is played. We now see capturing on e6, castling kingside from both sides. Knight g5, bishop g4, just starting to pounce on that e6 pawn, which has no pawns defending it. Right? When we look at the overall pawn chain here, the pawns in the back are going to be the weakest because they don't have a pawn defending them. and Carlsen goes after those right away. Okay, so the Boleslavsky variation against the French, interesting option there. Going to the move E5, we see this all the time at the elite grandmaster level, the Ruy Lopez. I'll be honest, I can't stand the Ruy Lopez. Maybe I'd like it if I tried it. I mean, ever since I was a kid, I don't know why I've just never wanted to play that move. But it is good. It's very strong, and there's a lot of grandmaster games that you could look into to kind of prep up your knowledge. But Knight f6 here, we often see castling kingside. And most of Carlsen's opponents here play the move of bishop e7, right? And then after that, we have moves like b5 and knight takes e4. Now, for those of you that don't play the Ruy Lopez, you might be wondering, wait, why doesn't black just take here most of the time? And this isn't a mistake. I mean, this is a good move, but black does have to be careful from this point. Black will usually just give the pawn right back, because once we play d4, let's say black here doesn't want us to take this pawn. They don't want to give the pawn back, and they take ours. Well, now we get a nice little pin on that knight, right? If we see something like d5, we're down 2 pawns. Now we're down 1. We're doubling up on this knight on c6. And, if black here tries to keep hanging on, we can take on c6 with our bishop. If you capture with the pawn, we play f3. You're going to lose your knight. It's pinned. It cannot move. If you capture with the bishop, let's take the bishop first and then play f3. You could throw in a check all you want. We block with the bishop. Whole idea being, if you take the bishop, we take with the rook. The knight's still pinned. You're still going to lose your knight. The horsey is done for. Castling kingside, we take the knight. And if the knight runs, we take the bishop with check. So I just wanted to give you that little tidbit on the Ruy Lopez. Very strong opening. I can't stand it personally. I've never been interested in it, but that doesn't mean that you can't play it, right? We all have different things, different openings that kind of, spark our imagination and get us interested. I play the hippopotamus defense. A lot of players would look at the hippo and go, you know what, I'm never going to even touch that. But I play the hippo. So I really quickly wanted to mention that I am giving out private lessons to those of you that are interested in taking your game to the next level. I mean, chess is a hard game. It just is, right? It's complicated. It's hard. There's so many different areas, openings, middle games, end games, tactics, pawn structure, all this different stuff. And it can be kind of hard to come up with a game plan on how to improve, right? And as a coach, my job is to help you assess your strengths and your weaknesses as a player, help turn those weaknesses into strengths. And once you do that, you should be cruising on to the next tiers. Okay, I've had many students gain hundreds of rating points through our lessons and going over ideas, going over games, all that kind of stuff. And I want to mention too, if you want something specific, that's great, right? If you want to just focus on the hippopotamus defense and working on that area of your game, great, let's do that. If you want to just focus on endgames, that's perfect. If you're a player that's like, you know what, I don't really know what I want to work on, but I'm just trying to improve and that's it, okay, that's when we can come together and come up with a game plan. No matter where you're at with chess, no matter what you're wanting to work on, I try my best to be flexible with my students and serve them the best I can. If you're interested, I'll leave a link down below in the description, in which case you can reach out to me. No strings attached, just a chance to reach out and just discuss where you're at in chess and really where you're trying to get. All that to say, I'm excited about the possibility of helping you improve at the game of chess. And let's head back to the main video. What about the move d6 with the Pirc? What we usually see here is d4 and knight c3, and actually against g6, the Austrian attack, right? This is a more aggressive line from Carlsen. We see Carlsen mixing up very positional play, right? The Queen's Gambit, the Ruy Lopez, and then we also see stuff like the Austrian attack against the Pirc, right? Against bishop g7, knight f3. I mean, black is okay here if they know what they're doing. White does have an advantage. Either side here, if you make a mistake, either side, you can give up this advantage pretty quick. But all that to say, this is a strong option, and a lot of Pirc defense players, especially depending on what level you're at. I mean, if you're under 1200 and you play the Austrian against the Pirc, most Pirc defense players are going to get creamed if you know what you're doing as white. So just keep that in mind. Going back to e4, what about the move d5? I mean, not too much to talk about here. We usually just see e takes d5 and knight c3. Okay, that's what we usually see there. I do want to mention that there are other options against d5, right? I think d4 with the black mark gambit is an option, pretty fun option. I play knight c3. I love this move for white with the lizard attack, as some call it. But really what this can turn into is a reversed Nimzowitsch defense Kennedy variation. I'll leave a link to that and a bunch of other openings down below in the description. But all that to say, I just wanted to mention that this isn't the only move that we can go with, right? But going back, what about the move of c6 with the Caro-Kann? Now, this is another example, right, of positional play. d4, d5. Most master players here, right, if we're looking at the totality of chess, we usually see e5 or knight c3, okay? But here we see Carlsen take on d5, continue with bishop d3, and play c3, okay? Now, there are other master players that play this kind of thing, but this kind of just shows Magnus Carlsen isn't too worried about getting an engine edge. He's not too worried about having a winning position. He's just trying to get a game that he likes and that he can work with. There was a game against Samuel Sevian, in which case we have this move of knight a3. Very interesting move from Carlsen here that kind of sparked my interest. I was going, what in the world is that knight doing there? But this knight actually reroutes over to d3, which is a great spot because black's already committed d5, weakening both of those squares. And notice, any time the knight is trying to get 2 squares diagonal of where it already is, that's going to take 4 moves, right? And that's what we see in this game. We see 1, 2, 3, and 4. Just an interesting idea that you can play with if you want to. In the game here, we have h3, knight e2, bishop f4, kicking the queen around, castling kingside from Carlsen. Sevian continues to taking the bishop. We take back, bishop g7, and now we start seeing the maneuver. Knight c2, knight e1. After queen f5, we take knight d3. White here with an edge, not winning, but with a nice advantage. And you know, this knight ready to pounce into any of those 2 squares at a moment's notice. And the game continued here with moves like f3 and g4 and, you know, getting this king out, rook h1, really putting some pressure on the king side of the board. And yeah, just some great chess by Carlsen there. So e4 here. Now going to this move c5, usually Carlsen played the main line here, right, of knight f3. Now, of course, in this case, there's a bunch of different moves that we could look at. We're just going to look at a few of them. First off, against d6, we see the English attack against the Najdorf. Okay, the English attack starts off with d4, and the Sicilian Najdorf, which I mentioned earlier, is this move of a6. Right, it's this setup as black against the following moves from white. Kasparov played this all the time as black, and there's a bunch of different things that we could see. I mean, there's the Sozin with bishop c4, bishop g5. I mean, is you know, considered by many to be the main line. You have something like bishop e2, which is a little bit more quiet, a little bit more positional. A lot of different things that you could see, a lot of different moves. But the English attack with bishop e3, I mean, this is an aggressive setup. White here often looking to just throw pawns down like crazy. Yeah, I mean, very aggressive setup here from Carlsen. Notice how he's mixing in aggressive openings and positional, right? And we're talking about, you know, his career here. We're talking about he's going up against top tier competition and he's mixing up styles, which I think overall helped his game. He learned how to play in any kind of situation. If his opponent took him into a positional battle, he's ready. If his opponent started attacking, he had good defensive prowess. If he needed to attack and sack pieces, he knew how to do that well. His game has been strong all around, right? There's really no weakness that I can think of in his game. Okay, it's really hard to pinpoint anything. So yeah, I mean, that covers the move of d6 going into a Najdorf. What about the move e6? Well, we see d4, still breaking things open, right? Knight c3. And here in the Taimanov variation, we have bishop e3. A6 can be played here. A lot of different moves now that we've seen from Carlsen, like bishop d3, a3, queen d2, bishop e2, but pretty aggressive setup again from the white side, right? And finally, going back to the move knight f3 against knight c6, going into an old Sicilian variation, we have bishop b5, and against g6, you know, the most popular move that we see from Carlsen is castling kingside. And then continuing here with rook e1. I mean, just playing a solid game, getting this bishop here, eyeing up that knight, developing in a natural kind of fashion. The second most popular move that we see, and I actually think this is going to be really good for you beginner chess players. I believe that Gotham Chess, Levy has commented on this before, but it's just taking the knight, right? When you see the Sicilian, one easy solution is just put the bishop there. And when you see that knight come out, get rid of it, and then just start developing, right? You know, Carlsen here often went with d3 and h3, preventing that bishop from coming in, solidifying this pawn chain, playing a move like knight c3, castling from black, and we now see bishop e3, and, you know, putting some pressure on c5, and against a move like b6, you know, queen d2. I mean, white here is just developing their pieces. White here is not trying to checkmate the king right away, but just get a solid position and develop in a natural kind of fashion. So yeah, I mean, again, going back to the first move, right? E4 is the most popular move that we see. D4 is the second most popular option that we see from Carlsen. And we see a mix here of aggressive and positional. We see a mix of really going for the win and going for complex lines like the Austrian attack or the English attack. We also see other lines like against the Caro-Kann defense. I mean, Carlsen just literally takes the pawn and plays bishop d3 and c3. Goes into a very drawish kind of position, but ends up getting a lot of nice wins with it because of his skill level. Okay, and that's what I want to encourage you guys with. I'm not talking about over the board chess. Okay, now, obviously Carlsen's a very strong player. He can kind of play nearly anything over the board and get good results with it. Most of us can't do that, right? So I'm not recommending that your next over the board tournament you start playing, a bunch of different openings. And most of you guys don't even play over the board tournaments probably, but in either case, what I do recommend is if you're online, try different openings out, right? Don't just look at certain openings and go, you know what, I'm never going to try that in my life. I'm only going to play my one opening. Try stuff out. It's going to help your game get well-rounded. It's going to help you in positions that you might not like. If you don't like playing defensive chess, play the hippopotamus defense, right? What you're going to learn is that your opponents might attack you like crazy. And once they do, if you know what you're doing, you're just going to get a better position. If you can't stand open games, play the Danish Gambit. Play something crazy like the King's Gambit, right? Just try to grow your reach of understanding of openings on this channel. I'll just be honest. When I started it, right, I did not think that doing all these opening videos would help my game because I wasn't going to ever play them, but they've helped me a ton. Ideas in the game of chess are huge. And once you learn a bunch of different chess openings and different ideas, you start to see how they're similar, how they're different, and you come up with your own style of play. I'll see y'all in the next one. What's up, y'all? It's July of 2024, and I wanted to give a shout out to my Patreon supporters. Y'all are helping me do this full time. And if you haven't checked out the benefits that you gain by becoming a member before, I highly recommend that you go and check it out. It's a lot of fun to hang out with you guys, get to know you guys better. Those of you that join the Patreon community. And on top of that, I mean, just a quick reminder, right? If you're wanting more content like this, just a reminder to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, as well as that notification bell, so that you don't miss out on a video coming your way. And again, I appreciate y'all. I'll see y'all soon. Peace.